With Alberto Carneiro, actually even Joseph Beuys, a Rose for Democracy, few things are happening. What's happening in Portugal, happening all over the world at the time. And it's really this idea that the revolutionary moment happening in the world, in the street, in nature, is of course totally contagious to the artist studio. And one of the center of this aesthetic revolution, if I may say, is happening in Italy, in Torino, actually, industrial city, with the Italian avant-garde movement called Artepovera. And actually, Serralves is very lucky and privileged to have in its collection many works by the artist, the Artepovera artist, which is a defining movement to understand the history of contemporary art, as Beuys is. And part of I would say, the modus operandi, because that's what we're talking about through the exhibition of this artist, was the use of, among other, natural and industrial material. In this room, you will see actually many artists from this movement, Artepovera, Mario Merz, Marisa Merz, Giovanni Anselmo, and many of them you'll see use ready-made material. They don't go to the art store anymore. They use what's available. For instance, you have this work here by Mario Merz, where the notion of how does energy circulate, how does power work is at the center of the work, actually of the work, with two elements which are almost antithetical to each other. One, which is this fluorescent tube, which contain light and energy, and the other one, this roll of paper, fabric, which is the one that does not contain the energy, that actually constrain the energy and isolate from the energy. So with this work, what Mario Merz is doing is creating a tension between two elements. But it's also, as very often with Artepovera, extremely aesthetic, because it's a drawing in space on the wall with non-conventional material. In the previous gallery, we had painting by other means. Here you have almost a drawing and a sculpture by other means, but also using the resources of the time. These artists wanted to be absolutely synchronized with almost the material culture of their time, the material history of their time, using electricity, power, industrial material. Behind me, for me, that's almost the Mona Lisa of the Serralves collection by the Italian artist Giovanni Anselmo. It's called Enter in the Work, entering the artworks, entering the painting. Of course, with this work, you have a relationship with painting. It's a monumental painting, and it plays on that. This idea that, painting actually dominates the room, painting dominates the status and the convention of art, but it happened not to be a painting. It's actually a photograph printed on a canvas. And at the center of this photograph printed on canvas, the body of the artist running away. So two things here. It can remind you, in a way, the work by Alberto Carneiro, who also entered the work of art, if nature is a work of art, with the body of the artist documented very differently, because in Carneiro's case, he doesn't use the reference of painting behind the work. It's pure documentation. You saw it on paper, almost like an administrative document. Actually, Carneiro played with that. There is an entire history or theory written about this notion of the administrative aesthetic. Artists working with binders, with files, with paper, with folder to document and save the work. Here, with Giovanni Anselmo, you have the history of painting. You're also talking about an Italian artist. And if you are in the 60s, 70s, an Italian artist disrupting the convention, you're talking from Italy. You're talking from the place in the world where, not that art has been invented, but where the tradition, the history of art is so present. Whether you're in Torino, you're in Florence, you're in Rome, you are surrounded by the absolute concentration of sculpture, architecture, and painting. So it's of course playing with this notion of painting, but it's also almost the format of a movie screen. And you're in the 70s, and cinema, as we saw with photography, with Carnero, is entering the making of art, and people start to see that photography and cinema are actually medium disciplines that are part of art history, part of art making. You also have this photo, this group of photo by the British artists Gilbert and George here, which are made with photography. So here you have this photography, scale like a movie screen, with the artist running away. He's running away. I mean, I'm not going to repeat, but from convention, it's a revolutionary moment. But it's also, it's a 1970 or 1971. I believe it's 1971. For me, it's absolutely incredible to look at this work and to think of Michelangelo Antonioni's work called Zabriskie Point. Zabriskie Point is basically a movie about youth revolution. And at the end of the Zabriskie Point, you have a group of young people, young adults, running away in the middle of an exploding landscape, naked in the desert, running away from everything they knew, from what their parents knew, from what society wanted them to be. And this work of Giovanni Anselmo, in many ways, echo this work by Michelangelo Antonioni. Still belonging to the Artepovera group, here you have one of the most important artists from the Artepovera group, Michelangelo Pistoletto. Actually, it echoes in a very nice way the work by Juan Munoz, this corrimão, where that signifies the absence of the body. Here you have an object, it's a wall, but a wall that almost has lost its function. To understand the work by Michelangelo Pistoletto, it's actually interesting that I talk about Michelangelo Antonioni, then you have Michelangelo Pistoletto. So it also gives you a sense of where the cultural context around these artists in Italy. Michelangelo. So they have to fight. They have to find an alternative to Michelangelo, which is also embedded in their name. So Pistoletto, the defining moment, I think, for Pistoletto is a group of objects called minus objects, which are almost everyday objects, like chairs or bars, like a bar where you go have a drink, but without their function. So, for instance, the bar is just this metal structure, and then you can lean. You have a wall sculpture, which is almost only the outline of a table with two chairs, but you cannot really use it. The wall here is also this notion of a minus object in the end, because there's no more the function. But he added the value, this fabric. Every brick is packed in this fabric. Of course, the brick, if you look at start to pull the thread of this work, the brick from the walls, like the pavement in the street, is what you throw at the authority during a revolution. So here, the brick is softened. It's softened. It's a soft brick. It becomes almost a pictorial composition, though it's made with. There's no order. There's no order, no composition. But also the fabric brings something else for me to this work: the human stain. We go back to the stain on the floor, the human stain. Each fabric, they are domestic fabric. They are fabric that you find in clothing, fabric that you find to cover chairs, to cover table, like tablecloth. And each fabric comes almost with a narrative. Michelangelo Pistoletto has done a lot of work with just the accumulation of clothing, piece of clothing, used, jacket, pants, sweater, shirt, and this accumulation is actually represent a little society. And again, like with the Juan Munoz piece, this fabric, they also tell something that the body that touched them, the body that wore them, has disappeared, is no more here. I was talking also about this notion of classical culture in Italy, the weight of the history. If you're in Italy, you cannot avoid it. You're surrounded by historical and aesthetic, artistic beauty all over you. Whether you walk through, again, Rome or Florence or Torino, history is there. And part of the artists there were also, trying to figure out not a way out, but to produce art which doesn't echo or react pushed against this tradition. And here with this piece by Gilbert Ozorio, you have a little bit of that. It's a column, and a little bit like the wall here, or like the piece by Juan Munoz, it's a column that doesn't have its function anymore. So of course it can be a reference to the Corinthian columns, Doric column that you see everywhere in classical or antique architecture, but it just happened to be an industrial object set up as a column. And it's also a column that does not support anything. It's actually a column that is supported by object. So the function of the column itself seems to be reverted, because the column is itself supported by what? Supported by air. You have this tube that you find inside tires. So the weight of the column, like the weight of history, the weight of tradition, is supported by this immaterial element, which is here. Not unlike the piece by Mario Merz there, you have a contradiction between the absolute weight of this object and the ephemeral lightness of the air. So you have a contradictory movement, as if this element of architecture was actually levitating away from the burden of history. So in the gallery we have also interesting confrontation, juxtaposition, but that feed in this moment of history that we are inhabiting here. Looking at this work by Antonio Barros, Portuguese artist from 1977, post-revolution in Portugal. Few simple words kind of capture what's happening here in the gallery. As you can see, it's this piece of fabric, almost like, when there is a funeral, you hang this dark fabric. But here it says, resolução, revolução, evolução. It's almost the cycle of history, and it's a cycle that these artists are formalizing in their work. You have to resolve something, then the resolution of something might bring the revolution might bring an evolution in art and in society. So all this work here, actually, that could be actually this work, this sculpture, this text by Antonio Barros could be actually the label for this entire group of work. That these 3 words would actually be enough to talk about all the works in this gallery.